the world's biggest and toughest prison for gangs. Chapter 1, Hook. Imagine a place where entire gangs are locked away together, where tattoos are more powerful than uniforms, where the walls don't just hold criminals, they hold armies. This isn't just a prison, it's a battlefield. Welcome to the world's biggest and toughest prison for gangs, a place so dangerous that even the guards fear stepping inside. The world's biggest and toughest prison for gangs. Setting the stage. All over the world, prisons are built to contain violence. But in this fortress, violence is the language of survival. Gangs don't just exist here. They rule. Guards are outnumbered, rules are rewritten, and life inside becomes a deadly chess game. The global context. From El Salvador's mega prison to the supermaxes of the United States, governments have tried to build cages strong enough to contain organized crime. But in some prisons, locking gang members together doesn't weaken them. It makes them stronger. Why this prison is different. Most prisons divide gangs to reduce conflict. But here, they are thrown together. Thousands of members from rival groups, stacked in cell blocks that feel more like territories than prison wings. The result? A hidden world with its own leaders, laws, and wars. The first whisper. Ask anyone who's been inside and they'll tell you. The prison is not run by the state. It's run by the gangs. The guards control the gates, but once inside the cell blocks, the gangs decide who eats, who sleeps, and who survives the night. Foreshadowing the war inside. But this system comes at a cost. With power concentrated in the hands of gang leaders, the prison has become a breeding ground for violence that spills into the streets. From inside these walls, wars are launched, murders ordered, and cities controlled from thousands of miles away. In the chapters ahead, we step through these gates, where gangs run entire cell blocks, like kingdoms, where riots have claimed hundreds of lives, and where governments wage a losing battle against an enemy locked inside, but never truly contained. Chapter 2, Birth of the Monster, Origins of the Fortress. It began with a promise to crush the gangs once and for all. Politicians stood on podiums waving their fists, declaring war on crime. Their solution? A prison so massive, so brutal, that it would strike fear into every gangster alive. The design. This was not built like an ordinary prison. This was a fortress. Endless rows of concrete, towers like eyes in the sky, walls so high even birds seemed afraid to fly over. Inside, cell blocks were designed to cage entire armies of men. The plan. The government's logic was simple. Put the most dangerous men in one place, cut them off from the outside world, and the violence in the streets would finally end. They called it containment. In reality, it became concentration. The gangs didn't disappear, they concentrated their power inside. The transfer. When the transfers began, the streets buzzed with relief. Thousands of tattooed men, leaders, killers, foot soldiers, were rounded up and sent behind the gates. For a brief moment, the outside world felt safer, but inside the prison, a storm was brewing. The silent shift. From the first day, it was clear the plan had cracks. Guards soon realized they were outnumbered. One officer for every 50 men. Radios crackled with warnings. But the truth spread quickly. Inside the blocks, the gangs were already taking over the unwritten rule. By week 1, an unwritten rule had emerged. The guards control the gates, the gangs control the inside. Food distribution, sleeping arrangements, even the use of toilets, all dictated by gang leaders. They didn't lose their power when they entered the prison. They gained more. International alarm. Human rights groups sounded alarms. Journalists called it a time bomb. But for governments, the numbers looked good. Crime outside dipped. Headlines praised the miracle solution. No one wanted to look inside and see the monster that was being fed. The powder keg. But the calm would not last. As the gangs settled in, they did what they do best: organize. Hierarchies were rebuilt, loyalties tested, and leaders emerged stronger than ever. The prison had become something new, less a cage, more a command center. The government believed they had clipped the gangs' wings, but inside this fortress, the gangs were growing new ones, and soon those wings would spread beyond the prison walls. The war begins. Chapter 3: Kingdoms Behind Bars. The Rise of Leaders. Inside the fortress, not every inmate was equal. Within weeks, natural leaders emerged. Men whose tattoos told stories, whose reputations were forged in blood. These weren't just prisoners anymore. They were kings of their own kingdoms. Territories within walls. Each gang carved out its own space. Dormitories turned into neighborhoods. Cell blocks became borders. Lines were invisible, but everyone knew them. Crossing one could mean instant death. The currency of power. With control came economy. Cigarettes, snacks, phone time. Everything was currency. Smuggling became an art form, and what couldn't be smuggled in was manufactured inside. In a world without freedom, power was measured by what you could control. Recruitment and loyalty. For new arrivals, survival meant choosing sides. There was no neutrality. You pledged loyalty or you became prey. Once inside a gang circle, you ate when they ate, fought when they fought, and bled when they bled. The rituals. Initiations were brutal. Some were forced to endure savage beatings. Others had to carry out a mission, deliver a stabbing, smuggle a weapon, or take a fall for another man. These rituals weren't just tradition. They were binding contracts of blood. The shadow governments. Before long, the gangs weren't just groups of inmates. They became shadow governments. They decided who slept in which cell, who cleaned the floors, who got food, and who got starved. They ran schools, they enforced taxes, and they punished disobedience with violence, smuggling the outside in. Despite the walls, the gangs reached beyond them. Phones, drugs, and even weapons flowed into the prison like water. Visitors, corrupt guards, and clever engineering kept the gangs connected to their street soldiers. Outside, command centers for crime. With phones in their hands, leaders didn't just run cell blocks. They ran cities. Murders were ordered, extortions collected, kidnappings planned, all from behind the walls of the toughest prison in the world. The fortress meant to silence them had become their war room. Rivalry explodes. But power attracts conflict. Rival gangs couldn't share the same kingdom forever. Whispers turned to stares. Stares turned to insults. And insults turned to blood, foreshadowing the storm. This wasn't just prison violence. This was war, organized, planned, and merciless. And it would soon erupt into riots so massive they shook the walls, scarred nations, and left the world asking, had the government created the very monster it feared? Chapter 4: The First Great Riots. The Spark. In prisons like these, violence doesn't explode without warning. Tensions simmer. Territories are tested, insults traded, debts unpaid. All it takes is one spark, one small act, to ignite a fire that consumes everything. The first blow. One stabbing, that's how it started. A single blade in a crowded block. Within minutes, it spread like lightning. The yard became a battlefield, and the guards never saw it coming. Overwhelmed guards. The guards rushed in, batons raised, shields out, but they were drowned by sheer numbers. Radios screamed for backup. Alarms blared. But inside the block, the gangs had already taken control. Territory wars in real time. This wasn't random violence, it was targeted. Each gang went after rivals. Leaders gave signals, hands raised, shouts echoed, and entire groups moved in formation. It wasn't a riot, it was a war. fought in real time inside concrete walls, improvised weapons. Inmates turned the prison itself into a weapon. Metal ripped from beds became spears. Locks stuffed into socks became hammers. Fire ignited from scraps of cloth lit entire cells in flames. The walls tremble. For hours, the prison became hell on earth. Walls shook with the pounding of fists and boots. Smoke filled the corridors. The air reeked of sweat, fire, and blood. Even veteran guards admitted this was unlike anything they had ever faced. The cost of survival. For inmates, survival meant choosing quickly, fight with your gang or be crushed by another. The weak were trampled. The hesitant were targeted. Only the ruthless lived through that night. Guards retreat. Eventually, the guards did the unthinkable. They retreated. They locked the gates behind them, leaving the gangs to fight it out. From the control room, they watched the cameras, powerless, as men slaughtered each other on the floors. Dawn Nachiram. Chaos. When dawn finally broke, the prison was silent. Smoke drifted through broken windows. Blood stained the concrete. Dozens lay dead, more wounded, some unrecognizable. And through it all, the gang stood stronger because the ones who survived had proven their dominance. The message to the world. The riot wasn't just chaos, it was a message. The gangs wanted the world to see that no walls, no guards, no government could strip them of their power. And the message was heard far beyond the prison walls. But control was already lost. The gangs had shown the world who truly ran the prison, and what came next would be even deadlier, because the riots were not the end. They were only the beginning. Chapter 5. The Age of Prison Wars After the Fire. After the first great riot, the government tried to restore order. More guards, more searches, stricter rules. But the damage was already done. The gangs had tasted power, and they weren't about to give it back. Military intervention. Soon the violence reached a level that ordinary guards could no longer contain. Governments deployed military units, soldiers with rifles and shields, storming the very prisons meant to hold gangsters. It looked less like law enforcement and more like war. The prison kingdoms. Each gang turned their block into a kingdom. Leaders became warlords, lieutenants commanded soldiers, and every man played a role. Fighters, lookouts, smugglers, tax collectors. The prison was no longer one institution. It was dozens of mini-states, all under one roof. Expansion beyond walls. What terrified authorities most was that the wars inside the prison didn't stay inside. Orders flowed out. Murders, kidnappings, extortion, all controlled from behind bars. For the first time, entire cities outside felt the reach of prison gangs like never before. The economy of violence. Money became the bloodstream of these kingdoms. Extortion rackets, drug trades, smuggling networks, all coordinated from cells. Guards and politicians were bribed. Families of inmates paid taxes to ensure survival. The prison was no longer just a cage. It was a financial empire. Brutal punishments. Disobedience was dealt with mercilessly. Snitches disappeared. Rival soldiers were executed in front of others as warnings. Some punishments were so brutal, even hardened inmates shivered. Violence was no longer random. It was a system of governance. Prison wars spill over. Eventually, the wars grew too big to be contained. Rival gangs launched coordinated attacks not just inside but outside, burning buses, assassinating police, terrorizing cities. The prison wasn't suppressing crime, it was fueling it. A nation on its knees. Governments realized too late. They hadn't built a solution, they had built a monster so large it consumed not just the prison system, but entire nations. Leaders called it the Iron Fist policy. Critics called it something else. State-sponsored chaos. Testimonies from the inside. Former inmates who lived through this era still remember the chaos. One described it as a city inside a city. Another said simply, Prison was the safest place to die. The world now knew the truth. The toughest prison for gangs didn't break them, it made them stronger. And soon governments would be forced into a deadly choice: fight harder or negotiate with the very monsters they had locked away. Sound, helicopter blades, and distant gunfire.